Shadow of the Colossus is one of the most unique and well-imagined games I've ever played. I truly hope that Sony decides to remake or reimagine this game in the future so it gets the respect and exposure that such a fantastic concept deserves. Done on today's graphical processors, a Shadow of the Colossus game could have the potential to tell a story at a scope like no other that would render people who can appreciate games as art utterly breathless. So for those of you who have never played it, what is Shadow of the Colossus and why is it so great? It's a story set in what seems to be a heavily Greco-Roman influenced world of sweeping, beautiful landscapes and vast, detailed architecture of both the natural and man-made variety. It's a story of towering, articulated, living behemoths, the likes of which have never been seen on a console prior to this. It's a story of a rather generic-looking and garbed Asian boy/man who has traveled a tremendous distance into a world of the unknown for the most noble purpose one could possibly undertake such a task, bringing back his one true love. Or for all we know from the beginning, it could be his sister. It really is only the shortcomings of the PS2 hardware that keep this game out of the realm of a must-have, must-play, all-time gaming classic. From the moment I booted it up, this game had a mood and a tone to it that I had never really experienced before. At times, the pace can be a bit too slow, especially during the redundant cinematic played after slaying each Colossus, but I liked how vast and spanning it showed the terrain of this game to be, and how it truly left me in a feeling of isolation. Me against the world. Heck yeah, that's how a good game should make me feel, like the fate of everything is in my hands. It certainly doesn't feel hurried or rushed, which is a tendency that many, if not most, games that come out today feel. It takes its time in telling its story because it knows it's not really for everybody. What sets Shadow apart story-wise from Zelda, and indeed almost every other adventure game I've played, is that this entire game could have probably been done without dialogue at all. The story is so clearly communicated from the musically led opening cinematics that we have no question as to why this man has traveled to where he is. If they had managed a no-dialogue adventure game in this day and age, it would have been masterful storytelling. But, in fact, the dialogue between the god character or disembodied voice, Dormine, and the protagonist brings our expectations back to earth, as it serves very little purpose and provides next to no entertainment. Also, it's translated like the King James Bible and performed in a fake language, not unlike The Sims. Arguably, these sequences are the game's biggest weak point. You'll have to watch this scene with very little variation about 15 times before the game's over. The opening cinematic, however, is another matter entirely. Utterly fantastic is what I would use to describe the pacing, musical accompaniment, ambience, and ultimate awe that I'm left in. Right up until the bland sequence where a mask slowly zooms toward us and the gibberish it spouts is pretentiously subtitled. Essentially, we learn that there's the possibility of bringing this girl back to life, but only if the protagonist slays the 16 colossi wandering the vast landscape of this world. Also, the cost will be great, whatever that means. Yeah, I think we can probably guess what that means. If you want to strip the game down to its absolute gameplay core, but shame on you for doing so, it's a third-person 3D action adventure where the main component is small-scale battle with huge-scale bosses that are anywhere in size from a large buffalo to a vertical or horizontal skyscraper. You find a weak point by either crawling over said colossus or shining your sword on them. You stab that weak point a bunch of times, they die, this black junk comes out of them and kills you, and you're magically transported back to the castle. Lather, rinse, repeat, ad infinitum. But the game is so much more than that. It's really hard to say what it is that makes Shadow of the Colossus so fantastic. But I would argue that it's the idea this game has more merit as a work of genuine art than probably 99% of the games on the market. It dares to be different and makes no apologies or attempts to make up for its shortcomings. There's virtually no verbal interaction with any other characters aside from the godlike Dormine, and there's no interaction with any other enemies except for the Colossi. Aside from a few birds and lizards, the entire landscape seems to be devoid of life other than the plant variety, and everything has a rather washed-out, desaturated look that kind of makes it seem like a dream sequence. You finish the game with the same weapons and items you had when you started, you don't really level up, and there's virtually no story revealed to us other than what happens at the beginning and what happens at the end about 10 to 12 hours later. Your only motivation for continuing onward is the promise of another epic, well-conceived battle, one of the best soundtracks in gaming, though it does get a bit repetitive after a while, and the possibility of eventually bringing back the woman you love. So what is it exactly? What gives this game such a unique draw? Looked at objectively, this game is essentially David versus Ultra Mega Uber Goliath 16 times over. He's there taunting us with his massive size and unmatchable strength, but somehow this little guy, through perseverance, is able to overcome him, no matter how many obvious advantages seem to be lorded over him. Perhaps part of the game's uniqueness is that unlike many games, it can be looked at on an allegorical level that nearly all of us can relate to. We each have at least one Colossus in our lives that we know needs to be slain if we are to progress at all, but many of us ultimately seem to lack the willpower, strength, or dedication and perseverance to do it. Could that be what it is? Is the draw of it that this character is my own avatar and a shining beacon of hope for me? The idea that no matter what the odds, if I push onward, I can and will ultimately achieve what I'm looking for? Maybe. There's two types of gameplay: fighting the Colossi, and wandering the landscape on your horse looking for the next Colossi to fight. Pretty basic. So, let's talk about the battles. When you actually do come upon the Colossi in the game, with a very rare exception, you will be initially left in smiling awe at their gargantuan size and the grim satisfaction that will be found in bringing these hulking masses down. Each one is a truly unique creation that seems to be comprised of a combination of earthly elements, be it rock, fur, plant life, scales, or other components. Each Colossus also wears a stone mask of some sort. The purpose of the masks never seems to be revealed, though my guess is it was really more of a technical limitation than something to do with the plot. After all, given their size and scope, it would be very difficult to have to render expressive, lifelike faces on the Colossi, in addition to how much of the system's resources are already chewed up in processing the game. No complaints, though. The masks also dehumanize the monsters quite a bit and really help you to see them as you have to. A means to an end and an obstacle in your path. In truly dramatic fashion, each sequence when a Colossus is brought to its figurative or literal knees is accompanied by a chilling choral song that further communicates the somber mood of the game. Wait a minute, game, you just forced me to kill that monster and now you're making me feel bad for doing it? What kind of mind job switcheroo crap is that? Graphically, the game is okay by today's standards. I know some people are going to get all up on me being like, this game was phenomenal for its time, and I completely agree with you. While it is beautiful by those standards, there are some areas where it just doesn't hold up well. I'll give you one incredibly blatant example. This sequence right here is right at the end of the game as you're about to confront the final Colossus, which I won't spoil by sharing pictures or video with you. Wow, that was just, I mean, you couldn't make the transition a bit smoother than that? How about some fog or something? Granted, it doesn't kill the game, but I couldn't help but chuckle a bit when that thing just popped out onto the horizon. Another thing about the gameplay is that the frame rate can seriously drop when in battle. Not so much that it ruins the game, but it does make the controls a bit less responsive. Getting to the point where your controls actually immediately respond to what's happening on the screen can be very difficult in the heat of battle at times. I found myself being shaken off a Colossus on numerous occasions because I simply couldn't determine when I was able to stab them and when I wasn't. You have to have a firm grip and can't be dangling, but you also have a limited time before your character will lose his grip, and then you're completely boned. The music in this game is among the best I've ever heard, or at least it was the first 10 or so times I heard it. While the composition and orchestration of most of the music is stellar, there are some points that it transitions much better than others, and some of the tracks seem to be repeated way too often. Or maybe it just all sounds the same to me. But again, for how well orchestrated and pulse-pounding the soundtrack is, this is nitpicky at best. If I had a chief complaint with the game, it would be that not enough of the story is revealed during gameplay to whet my appetite. Like I said, the bulk of it is conveyed at the beginning and at the end, and that's not for another 10 or 12 hours. However, the ending is one of the most satisfying I've ever seen in a game. Things are explained very well, and everything gets wrapped up rather nicely. although I still don't know the girl's relationship to the main character. Aside from that, though, you will have very little confusion by the end. Simply put, despite its shortcomings and rather obvious liftings of some Zelda-like concepts, Shadow of the Colossus rocks. It delivers a unique enough experience that anyone who is in the mood to try something different should definitely give it a go.